Robert Crawford had 4 miles between the facility and the only place he could see lights. He had approximately 90 minutes before the freezing cold would take him. And he had one recording, 7 minutes of his son plotting against him, that nobody had heard because nobody had come close enough to listen. For 17 months, the system had failed him at every checkpoint. This is Bob and Hammer's story, and what 120 bikers did in the parking lot of a Montana diner will prove that brotherhood doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. I served at Chosen. I never asked for anything. I'm asking now. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees by the time Bob Crawford reached the edge of the Timberline Diner parking lot. But for Bob, the cold wasn't just weather. It was an old enemy. It burrowed through his thin trousers and found the jagged piece of Chinese mortar shrapnel still lodged in his left femur from 1950. The metal inside his bone reacted to the frost, contracting and freezing from the inside out, feeling less like an old injury and more like a fresh drill boring into his marrow. Every step was a negotiation with agony. Drag, wince, breathe. His wooden cane, carved in 1975, with Martha's initials next to his, caught on a patch of black ice. He stumbled, gasping as the vibration shot up his arm, but he didn't fall. He couldn't. Falling meant freezing, and freezing meant he won. He stopped under the corner lamppost, 73 feet between him and warmth, between him and people, between him and the last chance he'd probably ever get. The olive-green army field jacket hung loose on shoulders that had lost 41 pounds in 17 months. The Purple Heart medal, pinned above the left pocket where it had been since 1951, caught the light from the diner windows, flashing like a distress signal. Both elbows of the jacket were patched with duct tape, silver against faded green. His brown work boots, Sears brand from 1985, were held together with wire where the soles had separated from the uppers. No laces. He'd tied them with twine. Bob's breath came out in white clouds that dissolved into the falling snow. His hands shook, from the cold, from exhaustion, from fear of what would happen if Richard came home early and found the bulkhead door still unlocked. The door Richard had forgotten to padlock when he'd left for his girlfriend's Christmas Eve party. The door that was always locked. Always. The recording in his pocket was the only proof he had left. Bob remembered last Christmas. He was living in the unheated basement, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled of mildew, shivering as he tried to warm his hands over a small electric heater that barely worked. But through the floorboards above his head, he could hear the warmth. He heard the laughter of a holiday party. He smelled the rich scent of roast turkey and sage stuffing drifting through the vents, taunting him. And then he heard his son's voice, clear and boastful. "Yeah, just bought the new truck in cash. Turns out the old man's pension accumulated quite a bit over the years. Best part? He doesn't even know it's gone. He's confused, you know, doesn't need money anymore." Bob wasn't confused. He was empty. He was cold. And hearing his own son laugh while he shivered in the dark hurt more than the freezing wind ever could. That memory fueled him more than food ever could. Inside the diner, through windows glowing warm and gold, Bob could see families, parents and children crowding into red vinyl booths, a waitress refilling coffee cups, an elderly couple holding hands across a table. 47 people living normal lives, the kind of life Bob had lived before Martha died, before Richard moved in to help. before the basement became his entire world. The jukebox inside was playing Silent Night. Bob reached into his jacket's inner pocket and touched the Walkman. The ancient Sony, held together with electrical tape, containing 7 minutes of his son's voice explaining how hypothermia was natural causes in elderly veterans, how $427,000 would clear gambling debts and leave plenty left over, how winter just needed to get bad enough. His service number ran through his head like it had for 73 years. US 51 724 186. US 51 724 186. The rhythm he repeated when the walls closed in, when the bucket in the corner of the basement reminded him what he'd become, when he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him like he was human. He needed to move, needed to try. Bob took the first step toward the diner entrance. The scrape shuffle of his cane hit ice, then his boot, then the drag of his left leg. Scrape, thump, drag. Scrape, thump, drag. The sound of a man who'd walked through frozen hell in Korea, who'd carried wounded brothers on this same ruined leg, now barely making it across a parking lot. A family of 5 was heading toward their SUV, loading shopping bags full of wrapped presents into the trunk. The father saw Bob approaching, saw the torn jacket, the hollowed cheeks, the way Bob's hands trembled, and immediately pulled his children closer. "Keep walking, kids," the father said, his voice carrying across the cold air. "Don't make eye contact." The mother shielded the youngest child with her body as they passed. Bob stopped, mouth half open to say he just needed help, just needed someone to listen. But they were already in their vehicle, doors locking with audible clicks. Bob swallowed hard, kept moving. 2 businessmen in suits emerged from the diner, laughing about something, thermal to-go cups in their hands. Bob adjusted his path to intercept them near their rental sedan. "Excuse me, Bob started. One man reached for his wallet, the other stopped him, hand on his wrist. "He'll just spend it on booze," the second man said, looking directly at Bob. "Look at him." The first man's hand dropped. They walked past. One of them deliberately shouldered Bob aside. Not hard, but enough to make him stumble, catch himself on the cane. Bob had never touched alcohol in his life, had watched what it did to men in his unit, swore it off at 20 years old. But his appearance now, the unwashed flannel shirt he'd worn for 8 days straight, the collar stained from hands that shook too much to eat cleanly, the bruise on his temple from where he'd hit his head on the concrete basement wall 11 days ago, told a different story. He understood why they saw what they saw. It still shattered something inside him. A young couple was loading Christmas presents into the back of their Subaru, laughing, breath misting in the cold. The woman had a Santa hat on. The man wore a college sweatshirt. They looked happy. They looked like Bob and Martha 50 years ago. Bob approached slowly, trying not to seem threatening, trying to seem like someone worth helping. The woman saw him first. Her smile vanished. She hit the key fob. Audible door locks engaging, chunk, chunk, chunk. "We already gave at church, buddy," the man said loudly, not even looking at Bob. Hand protective on his girlfriend's shoulder, guiding her into the passenger seat. Bob still had his mouth open, still hadn't spoken a word. They drove away, tires crunching over snow. He stood there for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The cold seeping through the duct tape patches, through the worn fabric, into bones that were 79 years old and had been cold for so long. What he didn't know was that while he stood there, trying to find courage to keep trying, 120 motorcycles were roaring up Highway 93 north, converging on this exact location for their annual Christmas Eve meal stop before continuing to the Children's Hospital in Helena. What he didn't know was that in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, his life was about to change. But first, he had to survive one more rejection. 3 church ladies emerged from the diner, carrying to-go boxes of pie, wearing holiday sweaters decorated with crosses and angels. They were in their 60s and 70s, the age of women who'd raised families, who'd organized charity drives, who wore their faith visibly. Bob saw them and thought, these women will help. He stepped into their path, not blocking, just visible. The Purple Heart caught light again. The eldest woman stopped, looked Bob up and down, his torn jacket, his wire-bound boots, his trembling hands. "You should be ashamed," she said. Her voice was sharp, cold as the wind. "Begging on Christmas Eve. The Lord helps those who help themselves. Have you tried getting a job?" Bob opened his mouth, closed it. The other 2 women watched, nodding agreement. "A real veteran would have more pride than this," the eldest continued. She gestured at his chest, at the Purple Heart he'd bled for. "You're probably one of those stolen valor cases we hear about. Buying medals at pawn shops, pretending you served. It's disgusting." The words hit harder than the cold, harder than hunger, harder than 17 months of Richard's voice telling him nobody cared, nobody would believe him, nobody wanted him. These were women who claimed Christian charity, women who Bob had served to protect 73 years ago when he was 19 and terrified and bleeding in snow exactly like this. Women who now looked at him like he was garbage pretending to be human. The Purple Heart was right there. The medal that came with a citation describing how Private Robert Eugene Crawford, age 19, had dragged 2 wounded Marines to safety while under direct fire, taking shrapnel that would live in his leg for the next 73 years. Right there on his chest, and they didn't believe it was real. Bob felt something break inside him that had managed to stay whole through everything else. He took 1 step backward, then another. The women walked past him to their car, still talking among themselves about the homeless problem and people who won't help themselves. Bob turned away from the diner. He'd tried. He'd walked 4 miles in a blizzard. He'd approached strangers. He'd been rejected by families, by businessmen, by a young couple, by church ladies who wore crosses while crushing the last hope of a dying man. He started the slow shuffle back toward the darkness beyond the parking lot, back toward the basement with its 43-degree air and concrete walls weeping moisture and the 5-gallon bucket in the corner, back toward waiting for Richard to come home, to lock the door again, to forget to bring food for another 3 days while he was at the casino losing Bob's pension money. That's when he heard it. The sound started low, distant, like thunder on the horizon. Then it grew. A rumble that became a roar, that became a deafening symphony of 120 motorcycle engines roaring in unison, shaking windows, setting off car alarms, announcing arrival like a military convoy hitting a checkpoint. Bob turned. Headlights swept across the parking lot, dozens of them, hundreds of them, more than he could count. Chrome gleaming under streetlights, leather cuts with patches reflecting light. The formation pulled in with disciplined precision, bikes parking in perfect V formation, riders dismounting in synchronized movements that spoke of years riding together. Hell's Angels. Bob recognized the patches, the skull logo, the 1%er diamonds that meant these were men who lived outside normal society's rules. Men most people crossed the street to avoid. Men the church ladies would clutch their purses around. And because Bob had just been rejected by everyone who looked safe, by everyone who claimed goodness, by everyone who should have helped, he made a decision that probably saved his life. He started walking toward them. Scrape, thump, drag. Scrape, thump, drag. The sound of his cane and boots and ruined leg carrying him across 73 feet of snow-covered asphalt toward 120 men who looked like exactly the kind of people you don't approach in a dark parking lot. But Bob had learned something at Chosin Reservoir that most people never learn. Sometimes the dangerous-looking men are the only ones who show up when it matters. Halfway across the lot, he had to stop. The cold, the distance, the 17 months of minimal food. It was too much. He leaned on his cane with both hands, shoulders heaving, breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to white clouds. He could hear Martha's voice in his head. "Stand up straight, Bob Crawford. You're still a soldier." Bob squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. The movement cost him. Nearly lost his balance, caught himself on the cane. The bikers were killing their engines now. The sudden quiet after all that noise felt heavy, expectant. Men dismounting, removing helmets, stretching after long rides. Big men. Scarred men. Men covered in tattoos and leather and the kind of presence that said they'd seen violence and weren't afraid of it. One man stood at the center of the formation. Taller than the others, 6'3" at least, with a full gray beard and a black leather cut covered in patches. The President rocker above the Hells Angels logo. He was just pulling off his helmet, running a hand through gray hair, when he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. An old man, skeleton thin, torn army jacket, moving toward him with obvious pain in every step. Marcus Hammer Sullivan turned to face Bob Crawford. For 3 seconds, they just looked at each other. Hammer saw the Purple Heart, the Korea-era field jacket, the wound-based limp. 79 years of carrying weight nobody else could see, in eyes that were still blue, still sharp, still scanning for threats like he was back on that frozen ridge. Bob saw the prosthetic left hand visible when Hammer adjusted his grip on his helmet, the combat infantry badge pin above the Hells Angels patch, dog tags hanging outside the cut that looked old enough to be Vietnam era, eyes that had seen their own wars. 2 veterans, 2 men who understood what service cost, 2 men who'd both lost pieces of themselves in deserts and frozen wastelands on the other side of the world. Bob took the final 3 steps, stopped at a respectful distance, 3 feet, military bearing despite exhaustion. Behind Hammer, 120 bikers had gone quiet, all watching this old man in duct-taped jacket approaching their president. Bob met Hammer's eyes, swallowed hard, and said the 11 words that would change everything. "I served at Chosin. I never asked for anything. I'm asking now." Hammer froze. Chosin. Every veteran knew that word. Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. Marines and Army trapped by 120,000 Chinese troops in negative 35-degree cold. One of the bloodiest fights in American history. Men freezing to death in their own foxholes. Frostbite so bad amputation became routine. A fighting retreat through 7 divisions of enemy forces. And this man, this skeleton with shaking hands and Purple Heart, had been there. Hammer's prosthetic hand came up. Not to shake, to salute. Full formal military salute, held for 3 seconds. Behind him, 120 bikers saw it. 73 of them were veterans. 73 hands snapped up in unison. The parking lot of Timberline Diner, Christmas Eve, Montana, snowfall heavy and silent, became a temporary parade ground honoring a man most of the world had rejected 20 minutes earlier. Bob's hand came up automatically, muscle memory from 73 years ago, returning the salute with fingers that shook but held form. Then Hammer did something that broke Bob completely. He stepped forward, shrugged out of his leather cut, the sacred garment in motorcycle club culture, the thing you never let non-members touch, and wrapped it around Bob's shoulders. The leather was warm from Hammer's body heat. It smelled like road and exhaust and belonging. Bob felt tears freeze on his cheeks. "You're with us now, brother," Hammer said quietly. His voice was gravel and smoke and absolute certainty. "Nobody touches our own." Hammer's right hand, the flesh one, went to the back of Bob's neck. Firm grip, protective. The way you hold someone who's about to collapse but refusing to fall. Hammer turned Bob toward the diner, arm around his shoulders, and started walking him forward. To his left, a man with road dog on his cut and eyes that screamed ex-cop moved to Bob's other side. A second wall of protection. The formation changed without a single word spoken. 120 bikers created a moving corridor with Bob in the center. Protective spacing. Nobody was getting through to hurt this old man. Not now, not ever again. They walked him into the diner. The warmth hit Bob like a physical thing. His legs nearly gave out right there in the entrance. Hammer and Road Dog caught him, guided him to the corner booth. Back to the wall, tactical position, the kind of seat you give someone who needs to see all exits. The diner had gone completely silent. 47 people staring at 120 bikers surrounding one old man in a torn army jacket. Road Dog brought coffee. Hot. Black. Pushed it into Bob's hands. Bob wrapped both hands around the cup, absorbing warmth that felt like the first real heat he'd felt in months. Took a sip. Nearly choked, because his throat had forgotten what hot liquid felt like. Hammer slid into the booth across from him. Several other bikers pulled chairs from nearby tables, moving with quiet purpose, not asking permission, just doing. Creating a circle of leather and ink and scars around this corner booth. Now, you might be thinking a Hells Angels president finds a desperate veteran, and his first move is to sit quietly and wait. That's not the story you expected, is it? You expected immediate action, maybe confrontation, maybe the kind of explosive response that movies have taught us to anticipate from men who look like Hammer. But Hammer had learned in 11 years as an Army Ranger that the most important weapon you can give someone isn't violence. It's patience. It's the space to speak truth without fear. So he waited. Let Bob drink coffee. Let warmth seep back into frozen fingers. Let the old man's breathing slow from panicked gasps to something closer to normal. 30 seconds passed. 60 seconds. The diner slowly returned to ambient noise, forks on plates, quiet conversations resumed, but everyone still watching. Bob set the coffee down. His hands were still shaking, but less violently now. "Thank you," Bob said quietly. His voice was hoarse from cold and disuse. I'm sorry to bother you. My son's been taking care of me since my wife died. I just needed some air. Walked a bit too far. Got turned around in the snow. I'll head back after I warm up. Don't want to trouble anyone." The words came out rehearsed, practiced. The kind of script someone repeats when they've been coached on what to say if anyone asks questions. Hammer didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Bob. Really looked. At the purple heart on the jacket. At the duct tape, holding the elbows together. At the way Bob's flannel shirt hung loose on a frame that had clearly lost dangerous amounts of weight. At Bob's wrists, where faded bruises formed perfect fingerprint patterns, the kind you get when someone grabs you roughly, repeatedly. At the hollowness in Bob's cheeks that spoke of weeks, maybe months, of insufficient food. At the way Bob's pants were cinched with rope instead of a belt, because no belt could hold them anymore. Road Dog caught Hammer's eye, tapped his own temple. Something's wrong here. Pointed subtly at Bob's wrists. Hammer nodded fractionally. Hammer leaned forward, voice gentle despite his size and scars, and the prosthetic hand resting on the table. "Brother, how long since you've eaten a real meal?" Bob's composure cracked. Just for a second, a flicker of something desperate and broken crossing his face before the mask came back up. "I eat fine. Richard, that's my son. He makes sure I'm fed." "When's the last time?" Hammer pressed quietly. Bob's mouth opened, closed. He looked down at his coffee cup. 2 days ago. He's been busy with Christmas preparations. He'll bring something when he— 2 days, Road Dog repeated flatly. The ex-cop in him already cataloging details, already seeing the pattern. Another biker appeared at the booth, older than the others, maybe 77, with white hair and Korea-era tattoos visible on his forearms. His cut read Pops. "I was there too," Pops said quietly, looking at Bob's purple heart. "Not chosen. I came in 52 after the line stabilized, but I know what that medal means. I know what you gave." Bob looked up at Pops. Something in his face shifted. The recognition of someone who'd seen the same frozen hell, who'd lost the same pieces of youth in the same impossible war. "They told me I was stolen valor," Bob said, voice breaking. "Those women, outside, they said I bought this at a pawn shop, said a real veteran would have more pride than to beg." The temperature in the booth dropped 10 degrees. Not from cold, from anger. Controlled, directed, righteous. "They said what?" Road Dog's voice was very quiet. Bob touched the purple heart with trembling fingers. "I got this at Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. I was 19. Mortar round hit our position. Killed 3 men instantly. I dragged 2 wounded Marines to the aid station while Chinese forces were 50 yards away and closing. Took shrapnel in my left femur. It's still in there. 73 years I've carried it. And those women in Christmas sweaters told me I was faking." Hammer's prosthetic hand closed into a fist on the table. The mechanical servos made a soft whirring sound. "Bob," Hammer said carefully, "why were you asking those people for help? What's going on that you needed help enough to walk God knows how far in a blizzard on Christmas Eve?" And that question, asked with gentleness by a man whose appearance screamed danger, in a booth surrounded by 120 bikers who'd made it clear Bob was under protection, that broke the last wall. Bob reached into his jacket's inner pocket. 3 bikers tensed immediately, hands moving toward waists, then relaxed when they saw what Bob was pulling out. A Walkman. Ancient Sony, held together with electrical tape and hope. Bob placed it on the table between himself and Hammer like it was something sacred and terrible. "He keeps me in the basement," Bob said. The words came out flat, exhausted, stripped of emotion because emotion would break him completely. "My son Richard, since Martha died 17 months ago, said it was temporary for renovations, but it's been over a year. He locks the door from outside. I have a bucket for, He brings food sometimes. Sometimes he forgets. Or he's gone. To the casino, I think. He took my pension, has power of attorney, took my phone, told everyone I have dementia, that I'm aggressive, so when people tried to check on me, he turned them away. Said I didn't want visitors, said I was confused." The booth had gone absolutely silent. In the background, "Oh Holy Night" started playing on the jukebox. The irony was not lost on anyone. "He took out a life insurance policy on me 6 months ago," Bob continued. $427,000. I didn't understand why at the time. But 5 weeks ago, I still had this. He touched the Walkman. Christmas gift from Martha, 1998. It has a voice recording function Richard didn't know about. I hid it under my mattress. And one night, I heard him in the hallway above the basement, on the phone, talking to someone about money, about timelines, about how hypothermia is natural causes in elderly veterans. Bob pressed play. The audio was tinny, distant, recorded through a basement ceiling, but the voice was clear enough. "Look, I need 3 more months max. The policy has to mature past 6 months or they'll investigate. It's gotta look natural." A pause. Someone else speaking on the other end. Inaudible. $427,000, that's the payout. I clear the gambling debt. Pay you back your 30, I'm set. Old man's 79. This winter's brutal. Hypothermia's natural causes at that age. Another pause. I just keep forgetting to turn the heat on down there. Let nature take its course. Insurance company already confirmed. Exposure death in elderly veteran, no red flags. Bob stopped the recording, looked at Hammer with eyes that held 73 years of surviving impossible things. "I've been trying to find a way to get this to police, but I can't leave the house. Couldn't leave until tonight. Richard was going to his girlfriend's for Christmas Eve, forgot to lock the outside bulkhead door. First time in months. So I walked, didn't know where to go. Just knew I had to try. I saw the lights here. I saw you, and I'm not crazy. I'm not confused. I'm just trapped. I'm 79 years old and it's 18 degrees outside and I walked 4 miles tonight and I can't save myself." His voice broke on the last word. Just for a second. The crack in the soldier's bearing that said this was the end of the line. This was the last stand. This was asking for help knowing you might not get it. "Can you help me?" Hammer picked up the Walkman, turned it over in his hands, the prosthetic one and the flesh one. Looked at this ancient piece of technology holding evidence of premeditated murder. He didn't listen to it again. Didn't need to. He'd seen enough wars, enough betrayal, enough evil wearing the mask of family to recognize truth when he heard it. Hammer stood. All 120 bikers stood with him. The movement was synchronized, instant, rehearsed from years of riding together in formation. "Bob Crawford," Hammer said, voice carrying through the suddenly quiet diner. "You served at Chosen, one of the bloodiest fights in American history. Outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, negative 35 degrees. You fought your way out of hell, frozen solid. That makes you the toughest son of a bitch in this building." He placed the Walkman carefully in his own jacket pocket. "Your son thinks he can murder you for insurance money. He thinks nobody cares about one more old veteran dying in the cold. He thinks the system that's already failed you 4 times will keep failing until nature does his work for him." Hammer's voice went very quiet, very controlled. "He's wrong." Behind him, Road Dogg pulled out his phone. So did Wrench, the club's tech specialist. Younger guy, maybe 44, IT work at Montana State University. So did Doc, the 71-year-old Vietnam combat medic who'd seen this pattern before. "You've got 120 brothers now," Hammer continued. "We're getting you somewhere safe tonight. Tomorrow we're calling every lawyer, cop, and news station in Montana. And your son?" Hammer's prosthetic hand clenched. "He's going to learn what happens when you try to kill one of ours." What happened next wasn't chaos. It wasn't the explosion of violence you might expect from 120 bikers discovering attempted murder. It was something far more dangerous. Controlled, disciplined, strategic action executed with military precision. Hammer extended his right hand, palm down, flat. Bob stared at it, confused, until Hammer nodded. Bob placed his trembling hand over Hammer's. Then Road Dog's hand covered both. Then Wrench's. Then Doc's. Then Pop's. Then every single member of Hell's Angels Montana chapter crowded around that corner booth, hands stacking on hands, forming a tower of calloused, scarred, tattooed protection. It was a patch holder ritual, marking someone as protected by the club. Bob Crawford, 79, Korean War veteran, was now under the protection of 120 men who'd just voted unanimously without speaking a single word. Someone in the diner was filming it on their phone. By morning it would have 14 million views. But right now, Hammer was already moving to the next phase. "Road Dog," Hammer said quietly. "You still got your badge?" "Retired, not revoked," Road Dog answered. His real name was Thomas Kern, 62 years old, 23 years with Cascade County Sheriff, before he'd retired and found brotherhood on 2 wheels instead of behind a desk. "I know exactly what we need and how to preserve chain of custody. Doc, you examine Bob, document everything. Photograph injuries, assess malnutrition, get body temp if you can." Doc was already pulling a small medical kit from his saddlebag. Old habits from Vietnam always carried supplies. "On it. Wrench, you get that recording backed up to 3 separate cloud services right now. And I mean right now." "Already uploading," Wrench said, fingers flying over his phone screen. "Google Drive, Dropbox, and my university server. Encrypted, time-stamped, unalterable. Teacher, you stay with Bob. Don't let him out of your sight. Keep him calm." Teacher, real name Marcus Chen, 56, former high school counselor who specialized in trauma, moved to sit beside Bob in the booth. His voice went soft, gentle. "Bob, I'm going to stay right here with you. Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. You're safe now." Hammer turned to the rest of the chapter. "We need witnesses, people who saw what was happening and said nothing, or tried to help and got shut down. We need documentation, banking records, medical records, apps reports, anything that shows pattern and motive. We need his address. And we need to move fast because Bob says Richard's at his girlfriend's house for Christmas Eve, which means we have maybe—" Hammer checked his watch. 3-4 hours before he comes home and realizes Bob's gone. Road Dog was already on his phone. "Calling Sheriff Martinez. We served together in 03. He'll listen." The diner had gone completely silent now. Families watching. Waitresses frozen mid-pour. The elderly couple who'd been holding hands now staring at this organized mobilization happening in real time. One of the businessmen who'd rejected Bob earlier, the one who'd said he'd just spend it on booze, stood up from his booth. He cleared his throat. All eyes swung to him. "I saw him outside. I said, 'God, I told my colleague he'd just buy alcohol. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.'" Hammer's gaze could have cut steel. "You see an elderly veteran in torn clothes on Christmas Eve, and that's your response?" I assumed." The man's face was red, ashamed. "What can I do to help now?" "You can sit down and think about why you thought that," Hammer said flatly. "And next time, you can do better." The man sat. The diner stayed silent. Within 15 minutes, the operation was in full swing. Doc had moved Bob to a back booth for privacy, taking vitals with equipment that seemed too professional for a biker's saddlebag. thermometer under tongue, blood pressure cuff, pen light checking pupil response. Body temperature 93.2, Doc reported quietly to Hammer. That's mild hypothermia. Another hour, maybe 90 minutes outside, we'd be looking at severe hypothermia, possibly fatal given his age. Malnutrition? Hammer asked. Severe. I'd estimate he's lost 35 to 45 pounds based on how his clothes fit and the muscle wasting I'm seeing. Dehydration. Signs of vitamin deficiency. His gums are pale. Skin's got that papery quality. He needs a hospital, but he needs safety first. Doc photographed the bruises on Bob's wrists with his phone. The yellowish one on Bob's temple. The way Bob's ribs showed through his shirt when Doc gently lifted the fabric to check for other injuries. These bruises on the wrists, Doc said for the recording, consistent with being grabbed forcefully, repeatedly. Finger-shaped patterns, multiple ages of healing. This one, he pointed to the temple bruise, approximately 11 days old based on color, consistent with impact against hard surface, possibly concrete. Evidence, documentation, the kind that would hold up in court. Road Dogg had stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, speaking with Sheriff Martinez. Dave, it's Tom Kern. I know. Merry Christmas to you too. Listen, I need you to hear me out because I'm standing in a parking lot with a recording of attempted murder, and about 4 hours before the suspect realizes his victim escaped. The conversation lasted 8 minutes. When Road Dogg came back inside, his expression was grim but determined. Martinez is sending 2 deputies. They'll be here in 20 minutes. But Road Dogg held up a hand. He needs witnesses. He needs documentation of prior system failures. He needs more than just the recording because a good defense attorney will claim it's out of context or illegally obtained. We need to build an airtight case right now, tonight, before Richard Crawford realizes what's happening. Hammer nodded. Then we get witnesses. Bob, what's your address? 1947 Pinewood Ridge Road, Bob said quietly. Who are your neighbors? Who else tried to help? Bob's hands twisted together. Mrs. Chen next door, 1845 Pinewood Ridge. She called Adult Protective Services 4 months ago. They came, but Richard was home. Had me coached on what to say. I was too afraid to contradict him. Anyone else? Pastor Williams tried to visit. 3 times. Richard turned him away. Told him I didn't want church people anymore. Which church? Frost Hollow Community Church. Pastor's probably home for Christmas Eve service prep. Wrench was already looking up numbers. Got it. Frost Hollow Community Church. Pastor Jonathan Williams. Calling now. There's a mail carrier too, Bob added. Donna something. She saw me in the basement window about 6 weeks ago. Filed a complaint with the Postal Service. Richard threatened to sue her. She got reprimanded by her supervisor. Road Dogg's jaw clenched. She got punished for trying to help? Richard told them she was harassing us. Jesus Christ. Road Dogg was writing everything down in a small notebook he'd pulled from his vest. Chain of custody, documentation, building the case piece by piece. 23 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. They walked into a diner full of bikers surrounding one elderly man. And to their credit, they didn't immediately go defensive. Road Dogg met them at the door, hands visible, posture non-threatening. Deputies, Tom Kern, retired Cascade County. This is a welfare check turned attempted murder investigation. We have audio evidence, witness statements in progress, and a victim who needs immediate protective custody. The taller deputy, name tag read Morrison, looked past Road Dogg at the scene. At Bob in the corner booth, wrapped in Hammer's leather cut, Doc checking his vitals. At 120 bikers standing in protective formation but not moving, not threatening, just present. Sheriff Martinez briefed us, Morrison said carefully. Said you had credible evidence of elder abuse and fraud. And premeditated attempted murder, Road Dogg added. Want to hear the recording? While the deputies listened to Richard's voice explaining how hypothermia was natural causes and $427,000 was worth waiting 3 more months for, other pieces of the operation were falling into place. Wrench had reached Pastor Williams, who'd left his Christmas Eve service prep immediately upon hearing Bob's name and the words attempted murder. He was driving to the diner now. ETA 12 minutes. A second call had gone out to Eleanor Chen, Bob's neighbor. She'd been hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation, afraid of getting involved, until Road Dogg had explained that Bob was safe, that law enforcement was involved, that this was her chance to tell the truth without fear. She agreed to come. ETA 18 minutes. Hammer had made a third call himself, to a lawyer named Patricia Crowley, 61, who specialized in elder abuse cases and didn't mind getting woken up at 7:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve when the words veteran, basement prison, and insurance fraud were involved. She was on her way, ETA 34 minutes from Helena. The net was closing. Eleanor Chen arrived first. She was 71. Korean-American, had lived at 1845 Pinewood Ridge for 33 years. She walked into the diner and saw Bob, and her hand went to her mouth. "Oh, Bob," she whispered. "Oh my God, you're so thin." Deputy Morrison guided her to a quiet booth, pulled out a recording device. "Mrs. Chen, I need you to tell me everything you saw, everything you heard, everything you reported. This is an official statement." Eleanor's hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I've lived next to Bob Crawford for 33 years. After Martha died, Richard moved in. At first it seemed fine, a son helping his elderly father. But about 14 months ago, I started noticing changes." "What kind of changes?" "Bob stopped coming outside, completely. I used to see him getting mail, working in his garden, walking to check on his truck. After Richard moved in, nothing. When I asked Richard about it, he said Bob was struggling with grief, preferred solitude. I believed him for a while." "When did you stop believing him?" 8 months ago. I saw Bob's face in the basement window, the small one near ground level, the one that faces my property. He looked terrified. He was mouthing something. I think it was, 'Help me.'" She pulled a tissue from her purse, dabbed at her eyes. "I called Adult Protective Services, filed a formal report, said I'd seen evidence of possible confinement, that I'd heard Bob crying through the window on 3 separate occasions, that his weight loss was visible even from a distance." "What happened with that report?" "An investigator came, Thomas Weiland. He spent 8 minutes at the house. Richard was home, showed him an upstairs bedroom, said that's where Bob lived. Bob was there, coached to say he was fine. The investigator never checked the basement, never asked to see the rest of the house. Case closed as unsubstantiated." Her voice broke. "I failed him. I called the people who are supposed to protect vulnerable adults, and they spent 8 minutes and left. I didn't know what else to do." Morrison wrote every word. "Mrs. Chen, this isn't your failure. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. The system failed. You're helping fix that now." Pastor Jonathan Williams arrived next. 64 years old, had known Bob Crawford for 31 years, had presided over Martha's funeral. His statement was equally damning. Bob stopped attending services 14 months ago. After 31 years of never missing a Sunday unless he was physically hospitalized, he just vanished. I attempted 3 home visits between April and June of this year. What happened? First visit, April 14th, Richard answered the door, said Bob was sleeping, had a bad morning, couldn't receive visitors. I asked if I could wait. Richard said no, that Bob had given specific instructions not to be disturbed. Second visit? May 3rd. Richard said Bob didn't want visitors, that he was going through a difficult time processing Martha's death and needed space. I offered grief counseling. Richard said Bob wasn't interested. Third visit? The pastor's face hardened. June 12th. I was persistent because this wasn't like Bob. He'd always welcomed church support. Richard became hostile. Said Bob had specifically said he didn't want church people bothering him anymore. Threatened to call the police if I came back. Said I was trespassing. Did you believe him? I wanted to, but it didn't fit the man I'd known for 3 decades. I tried calling the house phone. It rang unanswered. I sent letters, never got responses. Eventually He paused, swallowed. I told myself Bob was an adult, capable of making his own choices, that maybe grief had changed him. I backed off. You feel guilty, Morrison said. It wasn't a question. I should have tried harder. I should have known something was wrong. I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to know when my congregation is suffering. You tried 3 times. Most people don't try once. Your statement here is helping save his life. By 8:15 p.m., the picture was devastatingly clear. Deputy Morrison had statements from Eleanor Chen and Pastor Williams. He had Bob's own testimony. He had the recording. He had Doc's medical documentation showing hypothermia, malnutrition, bruising consistent with grab marks. Wrench had pulled Richard Crawford's social media, Facebook posts showing him at Billings Casino. On the weekends, he'd told Pastor Williams Bob was too ill for church. Photos of Richard's new Ford F-150. Kitchen renovation pictures dated July 2024 with captions about upgrading while his father lived in a freezing basement. Road Dogg had called in a favor with a contact at the bank and obtained, technically without warrant, but admissible under exigent circumstances, records showing Richard had withdrawn Bob's full pension and Social Security every month for 17 months. Total, $4,181, monthly, 77 over the period. Almost none of it spent on Bob's care. Patricia Crowley, the lawyer, had arrived and was already drafting emergency protective orders and filing for emergency custody removal. Sheriff Martinez called Deputy Morrison directly. We've got enough. Go pick him up. I'm issuing an APB for Richard Matthew Crawford, 47 years old, last seen at girlfriend's residence. Consider him a flight risk given the financial motive. Morrison looked at Hammer. Where's the girlfriend live? Bob, do you know? Hammer asked gently. Bob nodded. Stephanie Marks. Lives behind Mike's gambling den on east side of town. Richard bragged about her once, said she worked there as a dealer. Road Dogg was already looking up addresses. Got it. 847 Industrial Avenue, apartment 3B. Morrison radioed to his partner. Let's go. They found Richard Matthew Crawford at 8:47 p.m., barely 3 hours after Bob had walked into that diner parking lot. He was in Stephanie's living room, wearing sweatpants and a Billings Casino t-shirt, eating leftover Chinese food, watching a James Bond marathon on TV. The same hands that had grabbed his father hard enough to leave bruises were holding chopsticks. The same mouth that had planned murder for insurance money was chewing lo mein. When the deputies knocked, Richard answered with mild annoyance, probably thought it was a noise complaint. Richard Crawford? Yeah, what's... You're under arrest. Turn around, hands behind your back. What? This is ridiculous. What's the charge? Morrison's voice was flat, professional, devoid of emotion. Felony assault, criminal elder abuse, grand theft, fraud, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Richard's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, anger, fear, calculation. This is about my dad, isn't it? Did someone call you? He's confused. He has dementia. I have a doctor's note. The doctor's note is forged, Morrison said. We know. Turn around. I want my lawyer. You'll get one. Turn around. Now. Richard turned. Morrison cuffed him, hands wrenched behind back, metal clicking shut exactly the way it's supposed to happen. They walked him out in his sweatpants and casino shirt, past neighbors staring from windows, past Stephanie crying in the doorway asking what was happening. Face scraping against the top of the patrol car when Morrison guided him in. The kind of small indignity that happens when you're not gentle with suspects who planned to freeze their father to death for insurance money. Richard Crawford's bail would be set at $250,000, high enough that a man who'd stolen 77 and gambled most of it away, who had $127,000 in debt and zero legitimate income, wouldn't be making it anytime soon. Back at the diner, at 9:03 p.m., Hammer's phone rang. Sheriff Martinez. We got him. En route to booking now. The recording alone would have been shaky, but with the witness statements, the financial records, the medical documentation, this is airtight. DA is going to love this case. Hammer looked at Bob, still sitting in that corner booth, Teacher Chen beside him, Doc monitoring his vitals, surrounded by 120 bikers who'd decided he was worth protecting. Bob, Hammer said quietly, Richard's in custody. He's not coming home. He can't hurt you anymore. Bob stared at him, the information taking several seconds to process. He's arrested? Felony assault, elder abuse, grand theft, fraud, attempted murder. He's facing 8 to 15 years in state prison, no parole eligibility for 5. And that's if the DA shows mercy, which, based on what Martinez just said, isn't likely. Bob's hands started shaking again, not from cold this time, but from the weight of 17 months lifting all at once. I'm not going back to the basement? Never. Patricia Crowley, she's the lawyer who just got here. She's already filed emergency protective orders. The house is yours. Richard can't go within 500 feet of you. She's also filing to revoke his power of attorney and get you back control of your finances. I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. The basement is. Pops spoke up. 77 years old, club founder, Korean War veteran himself from the 52 campaign. You're staying with me, Pops said firmly. I've got a guest house. It's warm. It's got a real bed. It's got a bathroom. No buckets. You're staying there until we get your house cleaned up and safe. Teacher Chen added, We're taking you to Helena Regional Medical tonight. You need IV fluids. You need proper nutrition reintroduction. You need to be examined by doctors who can document everything for the legal case. Doc nodded. I'll ride with you. Make sure they understand the full scope. Bob looked around at these men. These dangerous, scarred, leather-wearing men who'd taken one look at a broken veteran and decided he was worth an entire night's mobilization. Why? Bob asked. His voice was very small. Why would you do all this for me? Hammer leaned forward. Because you served at Chosin. Because you carry shrapnel from 1950 and you're still standing. Because your son thought nobody would care about one more old veteran freezing to death. And he needed to learn he was wrong. Because brotherhood doesn't end when you take off the uniform. He placed his prosthetic hand over Bob's real one. And because every single man in this room has been where you are, maybe not locked in a basement, but trapped, failed by systems that should protect us, betrayed by people we trusted. We know what it's like when the world looks away, so we don't look away. Not from our own. Not ever. The room went quiet. 23 men voting unanimously in that silence. Outside, someone's phone pinged. The video of 120 bikers stacking hands over an old veteran in a diner booth had just hit 3 million views. But inside, Bob Crawford was crying. Not from despair this time, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, being believed, being protected by an army of strangers who'd decided he wasn't a stranger at all. Justice had been served. Richard was in custody. Evidence was preserved. Witnesses had spoken. But justice wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. Helena Regional Medical Center was 47 miles from Frost Hollow. The convoy of motorcycles that escorted Bob there, 20 bikes, enough to make a statement but not overwhelm the ER staff, arrived at 10:34 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Doc walked Bob through intake, translating medical observations into terminology the ER nurses understood. 79-year-old male, Korean War veteran, presenting with mild hypothermia, severe malnutrition, dehydration, evidence of long-term elder abuse and confinement, the attending physician, Dr. Sarah Vance, 42 years old, took one look at Bob's vitals and immediately ordered IV fluids, warming blankets, and a full metabolic panel. "Mr. Crawford," she said gently, examining the bruises Doc had photographed earlier. "We're going to take very good care of you. But I need to know, do you feel safe right now? Is there anyone you're afraid of?" Bob shook his head. For the first time in 17 months, the answer was no. "My son is in jail," Bob said quietly. "And I have—" He looked at Doc, at Hammer standing in the doorway, at Teacher Chen, who'd insisted on staying. "I have people." Dr. Vance nodded, writing notes. "You certainly do." The medical examination took 4 hours. Bob had lost 41 pounds since Richard had taken control, documented by comparing his current weight against VA records from 18 months prior. His body temperature had normalized to 97.1 degrees after 2 hours under warming blankets and hot fluids. Blood work showed vitamin D deficiency, anemia, and early signs of muscle wasting consistent with prolonged malnutrition. "Another 2 weeks in those conditions," Dr. Vance told Hammer quietly outside Bob's room. "Maybe 3. His body was starting to cannibalize muscle tissue for energy. The hypothermia exposure tonight could have been fatal given his compromised state." "But he'll recover?" Hammer asked. "Physically, yes, with proper nutrition, environment, and care. Psychologically," she hesitated. "That's going to take longer. 17 months of isolation and abuse doesn't heal overnight. He'll need trauma counseling, probably ongoing therapy for PTSD, both from the war and from what his son did to him." "We'll make sure he gets it," Hammer said. And he meant it. By 2:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, Bob was admitted for overnight observation, sleeping in a warm bed with IV fluids running and monitors tracking vitals that were finally stabilizing. Hammer, Road Dog, Doc, Teacher, Wrench, and Pops sat in the hospital cafeteria, drinking terrible coffee and planning next steps. "Housing first," Road Dog said, ticking items off on his fingers. "Pops, you said he could stay with you?" "Guest house is ready. Heat's on, bed's made, stocked the fridge this afternoon. He can stay as long as he needs." "Financial recovery," Wrench added. "Patricia Crowley said she can get the power of attorney revoked by end of week, get Bob's accounts unfrozen. But the money Richard already spent, the $77,000, that's harder to recover." "We'll do a fundraiser," Hammer said. "Chapter's done them before. We raise what was stolen, put it back in his account." Road Dog nodded. "Legal support. Trial's going to be brutal. Bob will have to testify. We need to make sure he's got support through that process." "I'll handle it," Teacher said. "Trauma-informed support is what I did for 20 years. I'll prep him, be there for every court appearance, help him process." Doc leaned back in his chair. Medical follow-up. He needs regular check-ins, nutritionist, physical therapy for that leg that's been overcompensating for decades. Dental work, probably. VA should cover most of it, but navigating VA bureaucracy is its own war. I'll run interference, Road Dogg said. I know people at the Montana VA office. I'll make sure Bob gets every benefit he's entitled to. Pops spoke quietly. What he really needs is to know he's not alone. That's what'll heal him more than anything else. Community, belonging, knowing people give a damn. Hammer looked at his brothers. Ex-cop, combat medic, counselor, tech specialist, elder statesman. Each one bringing skills Bob needed. Each one ready to deploy those skills without hesitation. Then that's what we give him, Hammer said, for as long as it takes. 3 days later, Bob was discharged from Helena Regional with a care plan that looked like a military operation. Pops picked him up in his truck, drove him to the guest house at 1632 Silverwood Lane, a small cabin-style home behind Pop's main house. 1 bedroom, full kitchen, bathroom with grab bars Pops had installed the day before. It's not fancy, Pops said, unlocking the door, but it's warm, and it's yours for as long as you need. Bob walked in and stopped. The guest house was decorated, not lavishly, but thoughtfully. A small Christmas tree in the corner with lights glowing. A welcome basket on the kitchen counter with coffee, bread, soup, crackers, simple foods for a system relearning how to eat. A handmade quilt on the bed. Turned out Wrench's wife had sewn it in 2 days when she heard the story. On the mantel above the small fireplace, Bob's wooden cane, the one he'd used to cross that parking lot. Hammer had taken it from the hospital, mounted it on a simple wooden plaque with an inscription. Gift from Bob Crawford, chosen reservoir survivor. Christmas Eve, 2024. Brotherhood answers. Bob touched the cane with shaking fingers. Started to cry for the 3rd time in 79 years. First time at Chosin when his best friend died in his arms. 2nd time when Martha passed. 3rd time now standing in a warm house provided by strangers who'd become brothers. It's too much, Bob whispered. I don't deserve— Stop, Pop said firmly. You survived one of the worst battles in American history. You survived 17 months of torture by your own son. You walked 4 miles in a blizzard to save yourself when everyone else had given up. You've earned every damn thing in this room and more. Bob nodded, unable to speak. Dinner's at 6 at my place, Pops continued. Every night. You don't cook till you're stronger. You just show up and eat. Understood? Yes, sir. And Bob, the door doesn't lock from the outside, only the inside. You control when you come and go, nobody else. That detail, that small, critical detail, broke something loose in Bob's chest. Freedom. Autonomy. Control over his own movement for the first time in 17 months. Thank you, Bob managed. Pops gripped his shoulder. Welcome home, brother. The legal process ground forward with inevitable momentum. Patricia Crowley filed emergency motions and had Bob's power of attorney revoked within 5 days. His bank accounts were unfrozen. Richard's withdrawals were frozen pending trial. Restraining order filed and served while Richard sat in county jail on $250,000 bail he couldn't make. The district attorney, Michael Torres, 53, career prosecutor, called the case one of the most clear-cut examples of elder abuse and financial exploitation I've seen in 20 years. He filed charges: felony assault, criminal elder abuse, grand theft, 777, 877, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. Maximum sentence if convicted on all counts: 15 years state prison. Trial date set for March 17, 2025. While the legal machinery turned, Bob's recovery happened in smaller, quieter moments. Teacher drove Bob to his first therapy appointment at the VA, sat in the waiting room for 90 minutes, drove him home after, didn't ask questions, just said, "Same time next week?" Doc accompanied Bob to nutritionist appointments, helped him understand refeeding protocols. Small meals, 6 times daily, gradual calorie increases to avoid refeeding syndrome. Wrench helped Bob set up a new phone with his contacts restored, showed him how to video call his brother in Alaska, who'd been told Bob was too confused to talk, and believed it until Bob called crying and explained everything. Road Dog went with Bob to the VA benefits office, navigated paperwork to ensure Bob's pension was redirected to his newly unfrozen account, helped him apply for additional aid and attendance benefits he'd been eligible for but never claimed. Hammer stopped by every Thursday evening, always bringing something. Sometimes it was just coffee, sometimes motorcycle magazines, sometimes just silence sitting on Pops's porch watching Montana sunset. And every night at 6 p.m., Bob walked from the guest house to Pops's main house for dinner. At first, the walk was slow, exhausting, requiring the wooden cane. But after 3 weeks, faster. After 6 weeks, he left the cane at home some days. Brotherhood in action. Not grand gestures, just consistent daily presence. The fundraiser happened on February 8, 2025. Hells Angels chapters across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho organized a benefit ride. Starting point, Timberline Diner, the place where it all began. 317 motorcycles showed up. Entry fee, suggested donation $50, but pay what you can. They raised $84,230 in one day, minus expenses for permits and the BBQ lunch they provided. $81,647. More than Richard had stolen. Every penny went into Bob's restored account. When Road Dog called to tell him the number, Bob sat down on Pop's couch and didn't speak for 2 full minutes. "I don't understand," Bob finally said. "Most of those people have never met me." "They know what you represent," Road Dog explained. "Every veteran who got chewed up and spit out, every person the system failed, every time someone vulnerable needed help and nobody came. You're not just Bob Crawford anymore. You're proof that sometimes somebody does show up." 6 months later, on June 24, 2025, Bob Crawford stood in the parking lot of Timberline Diner, surrounded by 300 people attending the first annual Veterans Protection Ride. He was wearing a new jacket, olive green, like his old one, but this one without holes, without duct tape. The Purple Heart was pinned in the same place, polished now. His weight had returned to 168 pounds, healthy for his 5'9" frame. His hair was trimmed, his face had color. He was smiling. The event had been Teacher's idea, turn Bob's story into annual action. One day every June, riders across Montana would converge to raise awareness about elder abuse, veteran neglect, and system failures. They'd raised $127,000 this year, half going to Bob's long-term care fund, half to Montana Elder Protective Services for training and resources. The local news was there. NBC Montana. Social media influencers who'd seen the original parking lot video, now at 42 million views. But the real story wasn't the cameras or the money. It was in the details. Bob had testified at Richard's trial in March. The jury had deliberated for 97 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing: 12 years state prison, no parole eligibility for 8 years. Richard had aged a decade in 4 months, his hair graying, his face hollowed, the consequences of trying to murder his father for money etched into every line. Bob had stood in the courtroom when the verdict was read, teacher on one side, hammer on the other, and felt nothing but relief. Not joy, not vindication, just the exhausted relief of a war finally ending. 3 months after the trial, Bob had moved back into his own house, 1847 Pinewood Ridge Road. The basement had been completely renovated by volunteers from the MC chapter. Insulation installed, heat added, walls painted, converted into proper storage instead of a prison. Bob's bedroom was upstairs now, the master bedroom he'd shared with Martha for 51 years, windows facing east, so sunrise would wake him gently. Eleanor Chen visited twice a week for tea. Pastor Williams had resumed weekly check-ins. Bob had rejoined the church, sitting in the same pew, 3rd row from the front, where he and Martha had sat for 3 decades. The mail carrier, Donna Reeves, had been formally recognized by the Postmaster General for her attempted intervention. Her reprimand was expunged from her record, and she'd received a commendation for exceptional awareness and advocacy. And every Thursday evening, Hammer still stopped by with coffee. But this story isn't really about bikers or patches or even justice. It's about what happens when people decide that looking away costs too much. Think about the people who saw Bob suffering and did nothing, the family who shielded their children from him, the businessmen who assumed the worst, the young couple who locked their doors, even the church ladies who questioned his service. They all had reasons: fear, assumptions, busyness, cynicism. But none of those reasons mattered when Bob was dying. Now think about the people who acted. Eleanor Chen, who called APS even knowing it might fail. Pastor Williams, who tried 3 times to reach Bob. Donna Reeves, who filed a complaint even after being told to stay out of it. And 120 bikers who heard, "I served at Chosin," and decided that was enough. The difference between those groups wasn't resources or power or special training. It was simply the willingness to get involved when involvement was uncomfortable. There are Bob Crawfords everywhere, elderly neighbors you haven't seen in weeks, veterans sleeping in cars, children who flinch when adults raise their voices. People who look homeless but carry stories of service and sacrifice. People the system has processed and filed away and forgotten. And here's what Bob's story proves. You don't need 120 motorcycles to change everything. You need one phone call that doesn't give up when the first authority says no. You need one neighbor who trusts their instincts more than someone's excuses. You need one person who looks at someone broken and sees someone worth protecting. That's it. That's the difference between Bob dying in that basement and Bob standing here 6 months later at a benefit ride in his honor. One recording device hidden in a Bible. One unlocked door. One parking lot. One question asked with gentleness instead of judgment. If you've ever felt invisible, Bob's story is for you. It says, "You're not invisible. You're just waiting for someone who chooses to see." If you've ever felt powerless to help, this story is for you too. It says, "You have more power than you think." One call, one visit, one moment of refusing to look away. Pay attention. Listen when someone's story doesn't add up. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Care enough to be a nuisance when systems fail. Trust that instinct that says something's wrong here. And when you see someone who looks dangerous, covered in tattoos, wearing leather, riding motorcycles in formation, remember that sometimes the scariest-looking person in the room is exactly who you need, because they've been where you are. They know what it's like when everyone else disappears. And they've decided that's not happening on their watch. Bob's wooden cane still hangs in Hell's Angels, Montana clubhouse. Beneath it, they added a second plaque last month. Not all battles are fought on foreign soil. Some happen in basements, in silence, in isolation. Brotherhood means showing up for those fights, too. Today, Bob Crawford is 80 years old. He's gained back all 41 pounds. He walks without a cane most days. He volunteers at the VA hospital reading to blind veterans. He speaks at elder abuse prevention conferences. He's rebuilding a relationship with his 2 grandchildren that Richard had severed. And every Christmas Eve, he goes back to Timberline Diner, orders coffee, sits in that same corner booth, and waits for the sound of 120 motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. Not because he needs rescue anymore, but because that sound means family. The system failed Bob Crawford at every level, but Brotherhood didn't. And that's the part nobody saw coming when a skeleton in a torn army jacket approached a biker with a prosthetic hand and said 11 words that changed everything. I served at Chosin. I never asked for anything. I'm asking now. Sometimes asking is the bravest thing you can do, and sometimes the answer roars into a parking lot with chrome gleaming and leather creaking and refuses to leave until you're safe. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs to hear that heroes don't always look the way we expect. Comment below who your protector was or what you wish someone had done when you needed help. Tell me you stand with Bob and every veteran, every elder, every vulnerable person the world tries to make invisible. Because this channel is about proving, over and over, that gentle giants exist, that brotherhood answers, that one person caring can outweigh 1,000 people looking away. Subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. There are more Bob Crawfords out there, and there are more Hammers, too. The question is, which one will you be when the moment comes?